The Household Affordability Index, which tracks food prices, shows that the household food basket dropped by 1% in February compared to the 8.6% increase in January. Data shows that the average cost of household food baskets increased by R349.82 in January this year. While households may find respite from the slight drop of 1% in February, more financial burden will be felt following yesterday's, or this morning basically, fuel hike of an average R1.46 for petrol and the expected 9.1% electricity increase to come into effect in April. Dick Forslund is an economist at Alternative Information and Development Centre, and Mervyn Abrahams is Programe Coordinator at Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity, and both of them are joining us this morning. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for your time.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Mervyn, let me begin with you. So the information was collected from 44 supermarkets and 30 butcheries in Johannesburg, Durban, Pietermaritzburg, Cape Town and Springbok in the Northern Cape. So in which food groups exactly did we see prices decrease?
So good morning, Leanne. Good morning to all your viewers. Could I just say that the basket that we track consists of 44 very basic foods identified by women in low-income households that they wish to buy at the end of each month should they have sufficient income. So it is a basket constructed by low-income households. And as you said, the basket now stands at 4,355 Rand, which is an increase of 354 Rand year on year. But we did see in the beginning of February a drop in the prices of some of the summer vegetables. So the prices of tomatoes, carrots, butternut, green peppers, and a slight decrease in the price of bread. Those were the areas in which we saw decreases in the cost of the basket, which brought the basket down by about 1%.
Okay. But the reality is, and what I'm reading further on this, is that we still, as it stands right now, are paying 9% more for food than we were a year ago. Is that correct?
Exactly. That is exactly correct. And if we just drill a little deeper, then we see that the basket of 4,355 Rand is in fact much more than the national minimum wage would have brought in for the month of January.
No, it absolutely is. And I mean, the cost increasing by 354 Rand and 52 cents. And that is, I mean, that's an increase, not the basics. I mean, that's not going to get you through the month, but that is what the increase is. I just want to quickly, on a side note, Mervyn, you mentioned the price of tomatoes. That became a very big discussion point on social media last year when we saw a massive spike in prices of a lot of things. But what I'm seeing is that you said tomatoes are now sort of a little bit more reasonable.
Yes, largely the spike in the price of tomatoes was caused by inclement weather in Limpopo. Most of the tomatoes sold in South Africa is in fact grown in Limpopo and then carted around the country. So the weather affected that and of course pushed up the price tremendously, which raises another question for us, Leanne, and that is, should we not begin to localize our food systems rather than transporting our food from far corners of the country and then, of course, be exposed to climatic conditions?
Yeah, indeed. It is something to keep in the back of our minds. Let me keep, Dick, let me bring you into the conversation, Dr. Forslund. Now, obviously, we're in for a very, very tough ride. I mean, we saw in January the Reserve Bank hiking interest rates. This, of course, is leaving people with less money in their pockets. The petrol prices increased last night, and that is going to have a ricochet effect on everything. We saw the Brent crude price touching $110 this morning. This is bad news for us looking forward, meaning that the petrol price is more than likely going to even increase further. Transport, food prices, the general cost of living, and electricity going up over 9% now. This is what's happening to the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, My opinion about this is as good as anyone. We all know what's happening to the consumer. The situation is getting worse and worse, and especially when you have an increase of unemployment of, over 2 million, 2.1 million more people got unemployed since the last 2 years, since the pandemic started. So the whole discussion about basic income grant and about the special COVID grant, the 350 rand per month, is of course should be a part of this. And I think that the interesting thing with the household index of Mervyn's organization, which is gaining more and more authority, one can say, on these issues, is that when you look at the budget review, where they also publish a forecast and the actual rate of food inflation, the numbers from Mervyn's organization in Pietermaritzburg, which is collected in a special way and based on it's more like a women index, which is the person who is most responsible for buying food in the households in the 4 or 5 largest cities in South Africa. The numbers in the household index is 3 percentage points higher than the index used by the Treasury. So the Treasury had a food inflation of around 6% and a forecast of 6% in the coming 2-3 years. But here we see a completely different reality. So I think that is important to note. And on the 350 rand special COVID grant, which the Treasury now suggests and the Parliament will vote about it, it should be prolonged for 1 year. One must realize that this was 350 rand already in 2000 when it was introduced. Now we are here 2 years later. So what this 350 rand the value of these 350 has been hollowed out during 2 years, and maybe now it's kind of worth 300 rand in 2020 prices, and this is going to continue, of course, during this coming year. Especially if you look at the household index, which was published yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, if we look, Doctor, at the current situation in the Ukraine as well, we cannot isolate ourselves from the threat of a world war. We can't, and already we're beginning to see the effects thereof. Where would this leave us? I mean, we're already in a very difficult situation with things moving higher and higher. How is this going to affect us going forward?
Yeah, how will a world war affect us? That is a question you really have to think about. But one general thing I would like to say about that is that the role of the government and the state in such a situation and in a state of immense crisis should be much stronger, and you can't leave things and economic policy or what is happening on the markets and so on to a more and more relaxed reliance on private markets and market forces. And that is always happening in countries in times of war. Even the most hostile government to public sector service and so on, they introduce sharp regulations and give a much, much higher role to the public sector in times of unrest and war. And but our Treasury is on a different trajectory, as many of the viewers also know, who follow the news and also who experiences this as employees in public hospitals or as teachers in the country in public schools. And that policy is to diminish the role of the public sector. Should this crisis worsen, then the government has to mend their ways, I can say. Yeah. But it already should, because you can't have these cuts in public health and public education, etc., as we are seeing now, and which was again reaffirmed in this budget. So in terms of crisis, the role of the public sector becomes even more important than in normal times. And in a situation like South Africa, where over 50%, over half of the population is living on or below the upper poverty line, of course, that is, for me, that is self-evident, that the public sector and the government is the one who must intervene in the economy and try to mitigate for all these crises and debts.
Mervyn, just very quickly, as we, unfortunately, time just flies during these conversations and there's a lot to talk about. But if we look at the ratio of all these costs that we've been talking about compared to the levels of income of South Africans, I mean, I think all of us, in a way, can say that we're in the same boat. I don't know when the last time many of us got raises or increases on a salary front, but instead we just got to be happy and lucky that we have a job, but the levels are not increasing. I mean, where will this eventually lead the country? That the cost of living is moving into such a high position that we're becoming unaffordable, and the unemployment rate is growing. Nobody's getting more money, but we expect it to pay so much. I mean, isn't this what happened in the US in 2008 when people took so much debt which left them over indebted and couldn't pay their home loans, which of course was the cause of a global economic depression at the end of the day?
Yes, Leanne. I mean, we have to be extremely careful because the consumer can only take so much debt and repay so much debt. And so at the moment, we are seeing that households, particularly in the middle class, are way over debt. Well over 100% of income really can go towards debt servicing. I mean, we've seen it from the debt institutions in the country. So that does raise financial questions, and it should alert us to the potential of a financial crisis in the future. So the only way, really, I believe that what government needs to do, our solution really has to be in decent work and decent wages. There will always be fuel price shocks. There will always be wars. How do we build resilience in the South African consumer? And that is through greater employment and greater level of wages.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us just a brief look into this important issue that I think people are waking up to the reality this morning of paying the amount they are for a litre of petrol, which, remember, you are going to also pay when you buy anything going forward. Transport costs, food costs, everything goes up, and nothing seems to ever come down. Dick Forslund is a senior economist at Alternative Information and Development Centre, and Mervyn Abrahams is a Programe Director, Coordinator at Pietermaritzburg, Economic Justice and Dignity. Let's get into our news bulletin now at 7 o'clock.